Okay, so this is my presentation. Cognitive errors that lead to escalation of conflict and jealousy. So you may be asking, what kind of errors am I talking about, and what is the outcomes of these errors? What contributes to these? So all these errors I'm talking about contribute to a internal, external, or kinetic conflict in some kind of way. And the question is, why does this happen? Because we are human and inherently we are imperfect. So these are perfectly normal to make, but it is important to note that it depends on who makes the mistake and what position they're in, because these actions have consequences that don't only affect themselves, but maybe millions of other people. If a 5-year-old spills a cup of milk, it's no big deal. But if a president starts a war, it's a huge deal. And we'll see. I circle back to the availability bias a lot for my topics because it's so relevant and prevalent in a lot of these errors, a lot of errors that people make. So that's one that I come back to a lot, but we're also going to talk about fear of missing out, building people up in your head, and internal conflict like jealousy or envy, war, and relationships as a whole, marriages, friendships. So war is hell. It really is. When we elect our politicians, we expect them to be competent and serve our best interests at all times. War is rarely an interest of the people because it is so costly and cumbersome for so many different people. A war just doesn't affect two people; it could affect thousands and millions, and also a territory of half the world could be affected by a war with sanctions, things like that. So it's important to not make these errors in such costly situations. So here my quote is talking about Kennedy's Bay of Pig invasion. This was a foreign policy flop. And what error was made here was groupthink. There was no way to check Kennedy on this plan. There was no way to check the generals on this plan. And they just overestimated the strength of Cuba's Air Force, which led to the whole operation falling through and, national embarrassment of the United States. So time and time again, later US presidents and overall government would not learn from Kennedy. And we're going to get into that in the next one. So, like I said, Bay Pigs is just one example of it, but we also have groupthink in interventions in wars like the Iraq War. In the 90s, the CIA had inconclusive information that Saddam Hussein had nuclear warheads, which at the time was very convenient for the Bush administration. So they decided to launch a full-scale war and go after Saddam Hussein and paint him as the boogeyman for having these nukes. Come to find out 20 years later, the CIA said they had no real information of Saddam Hussein having nukes. So now this is two errors combining here. This is groupthink for the inconclusive information and the willing of the war, where nobody was there to check the president, the generals, and all the staff to say, no, this is the wrong thing. Let's wait. Let's get more solid information. Let's not jump to conclusions. That wasn't present there. There wasn't that devil's advocate there to keep them grounded in reality. We're also seeing now, like what the quote talks about, authority bias, where it's very easy to imagine in the military, if your commanding officer tells you to clean the toilet with a toothbrush, you're definitely going to go do it because you have that pressure, and you also have that coercion that if you don't, you're going to be met with severe consequences over something quite, petty. So we also see that again with all these interventions on the macro scale with the generals not checking the president, but also the soldiers not checking like their commanding officer. Say like an Air Force pilot has to bomb this building, they don't say, "Oh, I see an activity," or the commander says that they have to do it. It's it's very easy to imagine casualties piling up because of authority bias. Also, now back down on the macro scale from like a soldier's perspective, the Vietnam War is another combination of groupthink and the authority bias. And we see like with these villages, like in this picture right here, we see a village getting burnt and children standing by it. These are things that both parties have to deal with. The soldier has to deal with seeing the images, and some soldiers had to kill children and women during the Vietnam War. So these are not images that just go away overnight. These people do have their own, feelings and outlook on the situation, which contributes to things like PTSD and these poor people who get killed. So many soldiers were forced by higher ranks to do things like this for protection of the platoon. Another thing was this was another unnecessary war because this was France's territory of Vietnam. America really had no dealing with this territory in this part of the world. So, a way to avoid these errors is to have that devil's advocate in our government to check these presidents to make sure that we're going to war for the right reasons, and we shouldn't be going to war every 4 to 5 years. It should be something that's really rare, that's really meaningful, not just a pure war hawk ideology of just going there because politicians have the comfort of sitting at home while war's going on, not on the front lines. So we have to keep that in mind. And authority bias, check our authority no matter the consequences. A soldier might be discharged because they don't follow their commanding officer's orders, but if he does it, we see that if one person dissents, then it encourages more people to do the right thing and dissent when the command is knowingly wrong. So those are some ways to remedy that error. Now we're going to talk about relationships, friendships, family, spouses, things like that. So some topics we're going to cover here are friend groups. Some people have a hard time making new friends or getting a new friend group, and they rather have toxic, unhealthy friend groups than having no friends at all, and waiting to find better friends. This is the same case also for older people with relationships and marriages. They think that they can fix somebody with these flaws and tendencies that aren't conducive to a healthy relationship, and they think that they're mechanic and they can fix these people when they don't want to be fixed, and it's not even worth your time and effort because it's never going to change. And then finally, the last topic I'm going to cover in this section is when people don't really know their spouse that good, that contributes to a lot of underlying problems. And then people will see drastic changes and they'll inevitably grow apart and end in a divorce, which could be a very nasty, sometimes kinetic, but oftentimes it's internal, external, verbal conflict, which is, all produced by these errors. So if I'm dying of thirst and I really hate Dasani water, I think it tastes like recycled garbage. If I'm dying of thirst and a store only has that, it's the only thing they have available, I'll buy that water and I'll drink it because I'm just so thirsty. The same thing could be said when we talk about a teen looking for new friends. The teen may just find the first available easy friend to make, but that friend might not be serve the best interest of that kid because he might or they might be a criminal or engage in reckless activities or push peer pressure onto other kids to do dumb things, which can lead to a bad circle of friends, which leads to a bad life and actions. Um, the quote here is talking about the availability bias, is that people prefer easy information to get, even things like economic data, which is quite serious, or recipes. They want this bing bang boom, the quickest thing that they can get. So we also see that with teens, but older people are also just as likely to fall to the availability bias, because in marriage or forming long-term relationships, say somebody's starting to get old, and they want a family, they want the white picket fence, they want the house, they want that facade, that image of the perfect life or whatever. They want to just get the first person they can get and get married so they can have all those things, despite that person's issues and traits and stuff like that, all because it's easy and readable to get. Now, if I wagered you $1 million to jump out of an airplane with parachute that only has a 50-50 chance to work, would you do it? That's where you decide. Most marriages are doomed to fail, and the actual statistics show something like 51-52% of marriages fail. And this is a combination of factors, like I said, availability bias, but also now this is the idea of the mechanic. So in this quote right here, we're seeing a psychotherapist talk about having a patient who is a psychopath, and he says the best course of action is to tell the patient to kick rocks, because there is, he's only going to deceive you and make you think that you can help him, when he's not going to change, and he's only going to make your life worse. There's no real way of saving this person, because they themselves don't want to change. So we can see this in the context of relationships and marriage, because one of the driving factors of divorce is lack of commitment and being combative and argumentative. These aren't traits that just spring up overnight in somebody. These are things that are underlying, that they will deceive you at first and make it look like we're going to get married in a year, whatever. They put hard dates on things. Just do whatever you want. They're very agreeable, but after time they grow different and they show their true colors because of these tendencies, like the psychotherapist said in the quote. So these are things to keep in mind, these errors made when selecting a spouse. So some ways to remedy this and things to look out for, and another error that people are making, just to wrap it all up. When people are making new friends or they're looking for a spouse, it's important to keep in mind the swimmer's body illusion and availability bias. I'm getting that one. The swimmer's body illusion is convoluting traits with results, like the quote is talking about right here. The secret to happy people isn't like they take a pill or something like that. It's their traits that they have that give them an optimistic, positive outlook on life, and the result is that they're happy. So these traits make the results, not vice versa or any other way. So you have to keep these errors in mind and make sure you're not making them when choosing the best friend group or spouse to spend the rest of your life with. So some way to remedy these errors, like availability bias and the mechanic, and being a mechanic, and the swimmer's body illusion, is to just take a step back. If you're trying to make new friends, it's better off to start off with no friends than unhealthy, toxic ones, and wait until you get some friends that care about you and are there for your best interest possible, that you can both help each other and cultivate success together. Same thing with a spouse. It's important to be more selective and picky about things and really spend time with them and vet them, so that you're not going to have these underlying issues one day, 8 years down the road, because typical marriage only lasts 8 years. So these are all things to keep in mind to remedy these errors that we make when forming relationships and getting married and even interacting with her family. So the green-eyed monster, if you've ever read Shakespeare, this just means jealousy. So the two topics we're going to talk about in this section is social media making prevalent the natural phenomena of fear of missing out. This thing has always existed, and we're only seeing the acceleration due to social media. And we also see now with social media, information about a person becomes very easy and available to get and obtain for really no time investment. 5 minutes, I can look up anybody, and it's easy from that 5 minutes of looking somebody up to build them up and attribute all these characteristics to them that make them so much better and larger than life, when in actuality, you're building them up and tearing yourself down because of just seeing what they crafted, their image that they crafted. And we're going to talk more about that. So, like I said, fear of missing out is nothing new. And the error associated with fear of missing out is a person misidentifying a pattern and then attributing that pattern as real. So as the quote says, this applies to fear of missing out. You make the pattern in your head that this person is doing so much better than you. They're doing this, they're doing that, they're going here, they're going there, they're meeting this person, they're meeting that person. Their life is just so much better. But all we're seeing is a highlight reel. And it's very easy to make these errors and feel fear of missing out due to misidentifying that pattern. And this will cause jealousy, and you'll become envious. And this is an internal conflict that these errors will produce. Now, like I said, fear of missing out feeds jealousy. And social media is not all bad. It gives you a surface level observation, but that's just it. It gives you surface level observations and characteristics of a person. It's very easy to create a narrative on social media that your life is perfect and you're without flaw. But with social media, and it's all up to you what you put out there. If you don't choose to put out there any of your problems, it will see like this image. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's the person looking at your profile that is making all these connections in their head that are going through this internal conflict here because of this carefully crafted narrative of perfection. Well, hold on. So some ways to remedy this fear of missing out, this jealousy, this internal conflict from these errors that we're making of availability and misidentifying patterns and attributing them as true, is to just take a step back, roll back how much you use social media. This is an important part to the equation, that if you use social media less, you'll be less likely to dwell on all these things, all these thoughts, and all these people. With that time that you gain back, if it's 2 to 3 hours, or even just 1 hour, you can spend that time bettering yourself, so that you yourself will feel much better about, if you feel good internally, you'll feel good externally. And also, with social media, just don't convolute social media with reality, because it's not reality, it's not real. There's plenty of things that happen in the real world that are not representative of social media. Those are another things to keep in mind to combat those errors and those feelings of jealousy and envy. So now these are some questions that I'd like you to ponder and roll around a little bit and formulate an answer. Looking back about 80 years or so, give or take, would many of these documents become declassified, like Bay of Pigs invasion or Operation Northwoods, even the CIA saying that they knew Saddam Hussein didn't have nukes? Do you think military intervention is a good thing? even in the context of all of history, would you agree that there never was a good war or a bad peace? Also think about, is conflict always a bad thing? If an argument with a friend or a family member or a parent even, if it's gonna, this verbal conflict is and verbal sparring match is leading to sorting out an underlying issue, is that really a bad thing? And finally, do you think social media escalates conflict and puts social pressure on people to engage in toxic behavior towards one another? And do you think social media is one of the biggest contributors to fear of missing out? And here's some of my sources for the stats, CIA, um, and things like that, and also my 3 texts I used from the course.